barely the size of a loaf of bread. Her tiny hands still curled like she'd never left the womb. Her eyes, when they opened, couldn't focus for long. But one thing was clear to the doctors in that ER. This wasn't an accident.
The door was already open. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. Not unlocked. Open. Wide enough that the night air had crept inside and settled across the floor like something that belonged there now. He stepped in, called out. Nothing. The house was dark. The kind of dark that doesn't feel empty. It feels full. Full of something that hasn't moved in hours. He called again. Still nothing. His hand found the wall. The light switch clicked. Once. Twice. No power. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the room, and what it landed on made his knees buckle. Furniture overturned. A chair on its side. The small table near the entrance. The one Grace always kept her Bible on, shattered. He moved forward. He didn't want to, but he moved. What Daniel Okafor found inside the house on the night of March 12, 2019, would later be described by Inspector Tunbaligan, a man with over 2 decades of investigative experience, as one of the most violent domestic crime scenes he had ever walked into. Those were his exact words. A man who had seen things most people never could. And even he had to pause at that door. Hi, viewers. Before we go further, I want to ask you something personal. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you felt something was wrong, but you talked yourself out of it? Drop your answer in the comments. It matters more than you think. Daniel was found collapsed near the hallway by the time emergency responders arrived. He couldn't speak. He couldn't stand. The only thing neighbors reported hearing, sometime after 2 a.m., was a sound they couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't screaming. It was low, broken, like a man trying to breathe through something his body had no language for yet. By the time Inspector Baligan's team secured the scene, one detail kept coming up in every officer's notes. No forced entry. The gate, the door, every point of access, all open from the inside, which meant whoever did this didn't break in, they were let in. And somewhere out in the dark, while Daniel sat on that floor and couldn't move, that person was already gone. Chapter 2. 3 weeks before that night, the Okafor home was the kind of place people actually wanted to visit. That matters. It wasn't a house full of tension or unresolved arguments. It was ordinary in the best possible way. Noise at dinner. Grace's sewing machine running past 9 p.m. Michael's laughter carrying through the back window. Favor sitting quietly with a textbook she'd already read twice. The Icordu outskirts had that kind of neighborhood feel, the one where people still greeted each other by name, where kids ran between compounds, where someone always knew whose generator was running too loud. The Okafors fit right in. Daniel had been driving commercial routes across Lagos for 11 years. Long hours. Early mornings. He came home tired, but he came home. That was what Grace always said about him. He always came home. Grace herself was known throughout the area for her tailoring. Women came from 3 streets over. She was patient with measurements and honest about pricing. Nobody left her shop unhappy. Favor was 14. Quiet in the way that observant people are quiet. She noticed things. Teachers liked her. She didn't talk much in groups, but when she did, people listened. Michael was 9. He was the opposite of his sister in almost every way. Loud. Curious, always with dirt on his knees. The kind of kid who made adults smile without trying. For people, one house, a life that looked exactly like what it was, steady, modest, real. But here is what investigators would later uncover. In the 10 days leading up to March 12th, something in that home had shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It showed up in the small things. A neighbor, noticing that Grace had stopped standing at the gate in the evenings the way she used to. Daniel coming home earlier than usual on 2 separate occasions. Favor walking to school alone instead of with the girl next door. Small things. The kind you file away and forget about until later when everything makes sense too late. And at the center of those small things was a name that would soon appear in every investigator's report. A name the family knew well. Someone who had been inside that house more times than anyone could count. The question was never whether he had access. The question was what he did with it. Chapter 3.
What they found next sent nurses to the hallway in tears. Marks no infant should have, injuries no one could explain, and damage far beyond what a baby coming home should ever face. There was no crash, no fall, no
Everyone in the area knew Emeka Uche. That was the problem. He wasn't a stranger who appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't someone Daniel had hired once and never thought about again. Emeka had been around for years, showing up at the compound, eating at their table, calling Daniel uncle, even though they shared no blood. He was 29, a motorcycle rider, the kind of young man who always seemed to be between things, between jobs, between plans, between the person he was and the person he kept saying he was about to become. People liked him at first. He was easy to talk to, could make anyone laugh, had that quality where he made you feel like the most important person in the room while he was talking to you. But somewhere along the way, something in him changed. It didn't happen all at once. These things rarely do. The neighbors would later say he started coming around more frequently about 4 months before the incident. Weekly visits became almost daily. He'd arrive in the afternoon, stay through the evening, sometimes past 10. Daniel assumed he was lonely. Grace was less comfortable. She mentioned it, quietly, the way she handled most things, to a neighbor named Mrs. Adeyemi. Said something about how Emeka's visits were starting to feel different. Like he wasn't coming to see the family anymore. Like he was coming for something else. And then there was Favor. Investigators would later recover messages from Emeka's phone, fragments of a much larger pattern. Observations, questions about her routine, a kind of attention that no adult man should have toward a 14-year-old girl. Favor had not responded. She had kept her distance. And that distance, that quiet, firm refusal from a teenage girl, appeared to be something Emeka could not accept. He had told at least one person that he felt disrespected. That word came up more than once. Disrespected by a child who simply did not want to talk to him. In the days before March 12th, those who saw Emeka described a man who seemed to be building towards something. Quieter than usual, distracted, staring at things a beat too long. And on the evening of March 12th, a neighbor saw him enter the Okafor compound just after 9 p.m. He was not alone. Chapter 4. The hours before everything collapsed looked almost normal. That is the part that stays with people. March 12th started the way most days did in that neighborhood. Morning sounds. A rooster somewhere down the road. Daniel leaving before sunrise. His commercial bus already loaded with passengers heading into Central Lagos. Grace was up early too. She had 2 dresses to finish by the end of the week and a customer coming in the afternoon for a fitting. She made breakfast, packed Michael's school bag, reminded Favor about a test she had the following day. Ordinary, every second of it. By mid-afternoon, things were still quiet. The customer came. The fitting went well. Michael returned from school and immediately disappeared into the backyard. Favor sat near the window with her books. But at approximately 4:40 p.m., Grace received a phone call. The details of that call were never fully confirmed. What investigators were able to establish was that it lasted less than 3 minutes, and that after it ended, Grace went into her bedroom and did not come back out for almost 40 minutes. A neighbor who stopped by to drop off fabric said Grace seemed distracted when she finally came to the door. Her words were short. Her eyes were somewhere else. The neighbor left without asking questions. By 7 p.m., the evening felt different. There was no specific event, no argument, no visible confrontation. But 2 separate neighbors reported an unease on that street, the kind that makes you glance twice at a passing motorcycle. At 8:30 p.m., the power went out. The whole area, complete darkness. Daniel was still on the road. Inside the house, Grace lit 2 candles. Michael had already fallen asleep. Favor was still awake. At 9:03 p.m., a neighbor heard what she later described as a raised voice coming from the direction of the Okafor compound. She assumed it was a domestic disagreement and went back inside. At 9:43 p.m., the gate to the compound was seen opening. No lights, no sound of a motorcycle engine, just movement, 2 figures stepping into the compound, and then the gate closing behind them. Chapter 5. By the time Inspector Tunbaligan arrived at the scene on the morning of March 13th, the sun had not fully risen. He had been doing this job for 23 years.
Someone posted about her birthday like nothing happened. Someone walked free for months. And the system, once again,
He had learned, in those 2 decades, to separate what he felt from what he needed to observe. Walk in. Take inventory. Don't let the weight of what you're seeing pull you down before the work is done. But even he hesitated at the door. The first thing his team documented was the layout. Single-story bungalow. 4 rooms. 1 main entrance. 1 side door leading to the back compound. Both had been closed, not locked, but closed when Daniel arrived. No sign of forced entry at either point. That was the first detail that framed everything else. Inside, evidence of struggle across 3 separate areas of the home. The living room, the hallway, the back bedroom. Each room told a different part of the same story, and none of it suggested a quick or accidental encounter. Whatever happened in that house on the night of March 12th had moved from room to room. Daniel was taken to a nearby facility. He was not in a condition to speak clearly until almost 8 a.m. When he finally did, the first name out of his mouth was Emeka. Officers were dispatched to Emeka's known address within the hour. His room was empty. Not cleared out, just empty. The kind of empty that happens when someone leaves in a hurry, taking only what they can carry fast. His phone was off. His motorcycle was gone. 2 witnesses confirmed they had seen him near the Okafor compound the previous evening. One of them, a woman who lived 2 houses down, added a detail that shifted the entire investigation. She had seen 2 men enter the compound. She did not recognize the second one. Balogun read that witness statement twice. Then he looked at his team and said, "Find Emeka and find out who was with him." The search began immediately. But what no one in that investigation room could have anticipated, what none of the witness accounts or physical evidence had prepared them for, was what Emeka would eventually say when they found him. Because he did not run forever. 5 days later, he walked toward them, and the first words out of his mouth were not a denial. The fingerprint came back in 48 hours. 1 print, clean, lifted from the inner side of the hallway wall, not the door frame, not a surface you'd brush accidentally on your way in. The inner wall, the kind of place your hand lands when you're moving through a space you know well. When the results came back, Balogun set the report down on his desk and didn't speak for a moment. The print belonged to Emeka Uche. Not unexpected. He had been inside that house dozens of times. A print alone didn't close the case, but where it was found did. That hallway was not the living room, not the entrance. It was the narrow stretch between the back bedroom and the side door, the part of the house that guests rarely moved through, the part of the house that only people comfortable enough to treat it like their own would navigate in the dark. And on the night of March 12th, the power had been out. Whoever moved through that hallway did it without light. And they did it without hesitation. That told Balogun everything about how familiar this person was with the layout. Everything. The physical evidence was building a picture, not just of what happened, but of how long it had been planned. The overturned furniture, the movement across 3 rooms, the timeline from 9:43 p.m. to 2:15 a.m. That was 4.5 hours. Pause on that. 4.5 hours before Daniel came home. The person inside that house was not in a hurry. That detail, more than anything else, was what shifted this case from a crime of sudden anger to something investigators treated with a different level of concern entirely. Meanwhile, Emeka was still missing. His motorcycle had not been spotted on any of the roads leading out of Ikordu. His phone remained off. No activity on any account linked to him. But the second man, the unidentified figure the neighbor had seen entering the compound, left no print. No trace. Nothing. Which meant one of 2 things. Either he was careful in a way that took experience, or he was never really there at all. Balogun kept both possibilities open. For now, the phone records arrived on day 4. Balogun's team had requested them early, standard procedure, but the picture they painted was anything but standard. In the 30 days leading up to March 12th, Emeka had called the Okafor household 22 times, Daniel's personal number 11 times, Grace's number 7 times. And then there were 4 calls to a number that didn't belong to anyone in the family. That number traced back to a prepaid SIM. unregistered.
The size of a loaf of bread. Her tiny hands still curled like she'd never left the womb. Her eyes, when they opened, couldn't focus for long. But one thing was clear to the doctors in that
Purchased at a roadside vendor at some point in the 6 weeks before the incident. Untraceable beyond that. Whoever owned that number had been careful. The calls between Emeka and that prepaid number lasted an average of 9 minutes each. The last one was made at 6:47 p.m. on March 12th, less than 3 hours before two figures entered the Okafor compound. That was the connection investigators had been looking for. Not just Emeka acting alone. Not just a man who came back in a burst of emotion. This was coordinated. Someone had been on the phone with him hours before it happened. Someone who had agreed to something. Someone who showed up. Balogun requested surveillance footage from every available camera within a 2-kilometer radius of the Okafor home. Most of the footage was poor quality. The area had no formal security infrastructure. Small cameras above shop entrances. A single traffic monitor half a kilometer down the main road. But one clip pulled something useful. At 9:31 p.m., 12 minutes before the gate was seen opening, a motorcycle moved through the edge of the frame. Two figures. The rider, consistent with Emeka's build. The passenger, male, shorter, wearing a dark jacket with the collar up. That was all the footage showed before they moved out of frame. It wasn't enough for an identification, but it confirmed what the witness had already said. There were two of them, and now the prepaid phone added another layer. Someone who had planned this with Emeka, who had agreed to show up, and who had covered their tracks well enough to leave no physical trace at the scene. Balogun looked at the footage timestamp. 9:31 p.m. He looked at his notes. Gate opened. 9:43 p.m. 12 minutes. They had stopped somewhere first. He walked into the Otagunyon Police Division at 11:22 a.m. on March 18th. No handcuffs. No escort. He came in through the front entrance, approached the front desk, and said 4 words. "I need to talk." The officer at the desk recognized him from the circulated description within seconds. Emeka was brought into an interview room. He was calm. Too calm for a man who had been missing for 6 days. He sat down, and he started talking. The first part of his account was careful, measured. He acknowledged being at the house. He did not deny the fingerprint. He confirmed there was another person with him. But here is where it shifted. He claimed the plan was never what happened. His words, documented in the official interview transcript, were, "It wasn't supposed to go that far." He repeated that phrase 3 times in the first 10 minutes. Balogun let him talk. Emeka described a confrontation. Said he had come to speak to the family. Said things got out of hand. Said the second man, the one he kept referring to as the other one, was responsible for the escalation. He described this second person with specific detail. Height, build, a scar near the left eye, a particular way of speaking. Vivid, almost too vivid. Balogun's team moved immediately on the description. Ran it through every known associate of Emeka's. Cross-referenced with anyone connected to the prepaid number. Nothing matched. No one in Emeka's known circle fit the description. No one in the broader community recognized it either. But Emeka held firm. He drew a rough sketch when asked. He gave a name, a nickname, not a full name. He described where this person supposedly lived, a general area, nothing specific enough to verify. Every detail was just real enough to sound credible, and just vague enough to be impossible to confirm. Balogun sat across from him and watched his face as he talked. Something was off, not in the way a liar looks when they know they're lying. Different, like a man who fully believed what he was saying. And that, more than anything Emeka had said, was what made Balogun uneasy. The forensic report closed the door. Every surface in that house had been processed. Every point of entry, every room where evidence of struggle was found, every object that had been moved or disturbed. One set of fingerprints throughout. One set of shoe impressions in the dust near the side entrance. One person's DNA recovered from 3 separate locations inside the home. Emeka Uche. Alone. There was no physical evidence. None. That a second person had been inside that house on the night of March 12th. No second print. No second shoe impression. No fiber. No trace. Nothing that would place another individual in any of those rooms. Balogun brought in a forensic psychologist to review the interview recordings.
My granddaughter very, very much, and I do want justice for my granddaughter. The charges against my daughter, I feel, are something that she didn't do, something that she was not involved in.
The assessment came back within days. What Emeka described, the second man, the vivid details, the unwavering certainty, was consistent with a documented psychological phenomenon. Under extreme emotional stress, in certain individuals, the mind constructs a presence, assigns responsibility, creates an account that feels completely real to the person telling it. Not a lie, a fracture. The other one, the man with the scar, the dark jacket, the specific voice, had never existed outside of Emeka's account. That was the truth this case had been building toward all along. Not a conspiracy, not an accomplice. One man, one house he knew too well. One rejection he could not process, and a mind that, afterward, could not hold the full weight of what it had done alone. So it split the weight in two. Emeka was charged. The trial moved forward, and in the courtroom, he still described the second man. Still insisted, still certain. The jury took 3 hours. Daniel Okafor never went back to that house. He couldn't. People who knew him said he became very quiet after everything. Not broken in the way people sometimes imagine grief. Not dramatic, not visible, just smaller, like something essential had been removed and the space where it used to be was now just air. The community around that street in Ikorodu changed too. Some families moved, not because of fear exactly, but because the street had become the kind of place where every ordinary evening now carried a different weight. With the sound of a gate opening at night, made people pause. Mrs. Adeyemi, the neighbor Grace had confided in, told investigators she replayed that conversation for months. The one where Grace said she felt uncomfortable, where she had mentioned Emeka's visits felt different. She had listened, she had nodded, and then life had moved on the way it always does. That is perhaps the most important thing this case leaves behind. Not the investigation, not the forensic details. The moment before, there was a woman who said something felt wrong. She said it quietly, the way people say things they hope someone else will take seriously so they don't have to. And the person she told, kind, well-meaning, filed it away. Warning signs don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they come in the form of a sentence spoken at a gate, a neighbor's observation, a child who stops walking with her friend to school. Sometimes the most important moment in a case like this is not the night it happened. It's the week before, when someone knew, and the world just kept moving. If this story made you feel something, share it. Not for the numbers, because someone in your life might need the reminder that the quiet signals matter. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every story here is chosen carefully, real, human, and worth your time. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needed to read today. The street in Ikorodu is quiet now. Too quiet. And somewhere in that silence is the version of events where someone said something sooner, where someone listened, where 4 people came home,